The morning Clara Bennett got run out of Harlan's Crossing, the sky was the color of old dishwater, and the wind smelled like rain that hadn't decided yet whether to fall. She was standing in the middle of Decker Street with her one bag at her feet and a circle of people around her that kept growing, the way crowds always do when they sense something worth watching. Not worth stopping, just worth watching. There's a difference, and Clara had learned it early. Aldous Fitch stood 3 feet in front of her, thumbs hooked in his vest, mustache trembling with the particular indignation of a man who has always believed his displeasure should matter to everyone in earshot. He was the owner of Fitch's Dry Goods and Supply, a building that took up the better part of 1 block, and a man whose opinion took up the better part of any room. $7.40, he said, loud enough that people across the street turned to look. I extended credit in good faith, Miss Bennett, and this is what I get. Clara didn't flinch. She'd been in enough bad situations to know that flinching only invites more. I told you I'd have it by Friday. That's still 2 days. You told me that last Friday, too. She hadn't, actually, but correcting him in front of half the town would only make it worse. She held her tongue and looked at the ring of faces. Some curious, some satisfied, a few uncomfortable. Nobody was going to step in. She'd been in Harlan's Crossing less than 3 weeks, and she'd come with nothing anyone could see. That made her nobody's problem to defend. You're asking me to leave over $7, she said. Not accusatory, just flat. The way you state a fact about weather. Fitch's face went a shade redder. I'm asking you to settle your debt or remove yourself from this town. We don't have space for drifters who can't pay their way. Mrs. Aldridge, he gestured toward a woman at the edge of the crowd, rigid-backed, and watching with the expression of someone confirming a long-held suspicion. She's been kind enough to let you board these past weeks. That arrangement is finished. The woman he gestured toward, Nora Aldridge, who ran the only boarding house in town, looked at her shoes. She at least had the decency to be ashamed. Clara picked up her bag. It wasn't heavy. It never was. 1 change of clothes, a folding knife, a small tin of salve she used on her hands, and a book she'd been carrying so long the spine was held together with twine. Everything she owned, and it weighed less than a saddle. She didn't say anything else to Fitch. There wasn't anything worth saying. She'd learned that too. Some conversations end before the other person realizes it, and the only thing left to do is walk. She'd made it maybe 30 yards toward the edge of town when the screaming started. It wasn't a child's usual scream, the kind that rises and falls in the ordinary drama of a scraped knee or a squabble over nothing. This was a different pitch entirely. High and sustained and edged with genuine terror, and it cut through the noise of the street in a way that stopped Clara's feet before her brain had time to decide. She turned. A horse, a big roan gelding with a broken lead trailing from its halter, had come around the corner at a full panicked run. Someone must have tied it badly, or the post had given way, and now it was loose and terrified on a narrow street crowded with people. And directly in its path was a small girl who had frozen in the middle of the road the way prey freezes when it's run out of decisions. The girl couldn't have been older than 5. Dark braids, a blue dress. She was standing with her arms slightly out at her sides, like she thought maybe she could make herself big enough to stop what was coming. Clara dropped her bag. She didn't think about it in any organized way. The bag just left her hand and her legs were already moving. She crossed the distance between her and the girl in a diagonal cut, going low, not trying to outrun the horse, but to get alongside the girl before the horse arrived at the same point. She scooped the child up with one arm and drove herself sideways into the gap between 2 parked wagons, tucking her shoulder to take the ground rather than let the girl hit anything hard. The roan thundered past. She felt the wind of it, heard the iron shoes on packed dirt not 2 feet away, and then it was gone around the corner, and the whole street seemed to exhale at once. Clara sat up slowly. The girl was in her lap, eyes enormous, not crying yet. That comes after, when the shock loosens. Clara checked her hands, her arms, her head. Nothing wrong. She looked up and found she was surrounded again, the same crowd from 5 minutes ago, only now they had different faces on. A man pushed through the ring, tall, mid-40s, with the squared-off build of someone who had done hard physical work for a long time, and the particular look around the eyes of someone who hasn't slept properly in months. He went straight to the girl, crouching down, putting both hands on her face. "Lucy." His voice came out rough. "Lucy, look at me. You hurt?" The girl shook her head. The tears came then, the delayed kind, and she grabbed at his coat. He held her for a moment with his eyes closed. The kind of moment that's too private to watch, but you watch anyway because you can't help it. Then he looked up at Clara. His eyes were dark gray, deep set, with lines at the corners from either squinting in sun or worrying, probably both. He had a week of beard and a collar that had been ironed at some point, but not recently. He looked at her the way people look at someone they haven't sorted yet. "She's all right," Clara said, because he still hadn't said anything. Nothing hit her. She went down clean. He was quiet for another second. That was... He stopped, started again. That was a fast decision. The horse was faster. He almost smiled, not quite. "Silas Hale." He offered his hand. "Clara Bennett." She shook it. Behind him, the crowd was already turning back into a crowd. Conversations restarting, the excitement metabolizing into story. She saw Fitch watching from a distance. His expression hadn't changed much, which told her something about the kind of man he was. A second girl appeared from between the wagons, older, maybe 14, with the bearing of someone who has been taking care of people for too long at too young an age. She had the same dark coloring as Lucy, and she looked at Clara with a wary directness that reminded Clara of herself at that age. "This is Emma," Silas said. "My eldest." Emma nodded, but didn't speak. She put her hand on Lucy's back, and Lucy immediately reached for her, which told Clara everything about who really held that family together day to day. Silas stood. He was taller than she'd registered from the ground. He glanced back at the dispersing crowd, then at the bag Clara had left in the street, then at Clara herself. Something shifted in his face, the working out of a thought. "I heard what Fitch said," he told her, quietly, not making a performance of it. "Most people in a 3-block radius heard it." "Where are you going?" She looked at him steadily. "I'll figure something out." "You got somewhere to stay tonight?" "Not yet." He was quiet for a moment. Lucy had stopped crying and was watching Clara from the safety of her father's arms, with the curious intensity that small children have when they've decided someone is interesting and haven't yet learned to hide it. "I've got a ranch," Silas said. 6 miles out, it's... He seemed to consider how to describe it and land on something accurate. "It's not in good shape. My wife passed 14 months ago, and It's been a rough year. The girls need someone there, and I could use an extra hand." He paused. "I'm not asking for charity from you, and I'm not offering it either. I'm saying there's work and a roof. That's what I've got." Clara looked at him, then at Emma, who was watching her father with an unreadable expression. Not hope exactly, more like the controlled wariness of someone who has learned that hoping for things doesn't always work out. She thought about the road out of town, the next town, and the one after that. The way another boarding house always looked like the last one. The way a room felt like a rest stop when nobody in it was glad you were there. "All right," she said. Silas nodded once, like he'd expected that, or maybe like he'd hoped it and was relieved. "Wagon's on the other side of Garrett's. Give me 10 minutes. He walked away with Lucy still in his arms. Emma lingered. "He's not good at asking for help," Emma said. "Not hostile, just informational. That's the first time I've heard him ask anyone for anything since Mom died." Clara picked up her bag from the street. "Good to know." Emma looked at her for another moment, then followed her father. "Chum." The wagon rode out to the Hale Ranch, ran along a ridge before dropping into a shallow valley, and by the time they came over the top of it and Clara saw the property for the first time, she understood why Silas had been careful with his description. The house was standing, which was something. 2 stories, weathered siding, a porch that sagged on the left side where a support post had gone soft. The barn was in better shape than the house, which was either a rancher's priority or simply the building that had received more recent attention. Fencing stretched away from it in 3 directions, some of it sound and some of it listing. A vegetable plot on the south side of the house had been started and then abandoned. Weeds had come in and gone mostly to seed. The yard itself held the particular kind of disorder that comes not from carelessness, but from too much to do and not enough people or hours. Tools left out. A water trough that needed cleaning. A stack of split wood that was too small for what winter would require. Lucy had fallen asleep against Clara's arm during the ride, which had happened gradually and without discussion. The girl had just slowly migrated across the wagon bench until her head was on Clara's shoulder. Silas had noticed and said nothing. Emma had noticed and said nothing either, though she'd watched. "I should tell you," Silas said as he turned the wagon into the yard. "There's a situation with the county." Clara looked at him. "What kind of situation?" "A man named Gideon Mercer. He's the county inspector for child welfare. He came out 8 weeks ago. Someone reported to the county that the girls were living in an unsafe environment, that since Ellen died I wasn't—" He stopped, worked his jaw. "The report said I wasn't providing adequate care, that the home wasn't fit, that the girls should be considered for county placement." Clara held very still. "Foster placement?" "Potentially. Mercer said he'd come back for a second inspection. He's due in about 6 weeks. If the situation hasn't changed—" Silas pulled the wagon to a stop. He set the brake. He didn't look at her. "I could lose them." Somewhere in the valley, a meadowlark was calling. It felt inappropriate, that bright, ordinary sound. "Does Emma know?" Clara asked. "Emma knows everything. She's the one holding this place together. She's 14 years old, and she hasn't been to school in 4 months because she's been here doing what I should have been doing." His voice went flat at the end of that, the way voices go flat when they're covering something that otherwise might come apart. Clara looked at the house again, at the sagging porch, the weedy garden, the stack of wood that wasn't going to last past November. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "You could have told me in town before I agreed to come." "Because if I told you in town, you'd have had a reason not to come, and I needed you to see the place before you decided." He finally looked at her. "I'm not trying to trap you into anything. You want to leave once you've seen it? I'll drive you back." She looked at him for a moment. He looked back. He had the kind of face that didn't lie well. You could see the effort of it when he tried. "What happened to your wife?" Clara asked. "Fever. It came fast, and it took her fast. 3 days from the first sign of it." He said it the way people say things they've said 100 times, smoothed down by repetition until the words stopped breaking them open. "Ellen was the one who knew how to run this. The cooking, the keeping, all of it. I know cattle. I don't—" He let it go. "I don't know the rest." Lucy stirred against Clara's shoulder, then settled again without waking. "I'll stay," Clara said. "Through the inspection at least. After that we'll see." Silas got down from the wagon. He didn't say thank you, which she noticed, but his shoulders lost some of their set, which she noticed more. Inside the house was better and worse than the outside had prepared her for. The bones were good. Solid construction, rooms with decent proportions, a kitchen with a proper iron stove and a chimney that drew clean. But the surfaces were in trouble. Dishes had been done, but not well. Floors swept, but not scrubbed. The parlor had dust on every horizontal surface, and a quality of sadness in the light that Clara associated with rooms where people had stopped trying. Emma showed her the spare room at the end of the upstairs hall. It was small, with a narrow bed and a window that looked out over the barn. Someone had made the bed up fresh, recently, Clara thought, because the pillow smelled of line-dried linen rather than a closed room. "I made it up this morning," Emma said when she saw Clara notice. "Before Pa went to town, just in case." She said it without embarrassment, just straightforwardly. "That was thoughtful," Clara said. Emma shrugged with the particular nonchalance of teenagers deflecting sincerity. "The mattress has a lumpy side, left side. I'd sleep on the right." She left Clara to settle in. Clara sat on the right side of the bed. Through the window she could see Silas in the yard below, leading the team toward the barn, his movements careful and deliberate, the way tired people move when they've been tired for so long they've forgotten what the other thing felt like. She unpacked her bag. It didn't take long. The folding knife went in the drawer of the nightstand, the book on the sill, the change of clothes into the small chest at the foot of the bed, the tin of salve she set on top. That was all of it. Everything she owned arranged in a room that wasn't hers, in a house she'd agreed to stay in for 6 weeks. She'd done it before. Not exactly this, not a family, not a ranch, not the particular weight of 2 little girls and a man running out of time. But she'd arrived in strange places with nothing before. She knew what the first night felt like. The way the house sounds unfamiliar, and the darkness sits differently, and you lie awake listening to someone else's life moving around you. She went back downstairs. Emma was at the kitchen stove, doing something to a pot that smelled like beans, with Lucy sitting at the table drawing on a piece of paper with a stub of pencil. Lucy looked up when Clara came in and gave her the particular smile that children give adults they've decided are acceptable. "Can you cook?" Emma asked without turning around. Not rude, just practical. She was a very practical 14-year-old. "Well enough," Clara said. "Not fancy." "We don't need fancy. We need enough. Pa eats anything. Lucy won't eat peas. I can't get bread to rise right. The last batch came out like—" She made a gesture with her free hand indicating something dense and inedible. "What's your starter situation?" Emma looked at her now. "My what?" "Sourdough starter. You have one?" "There's something in the cellar that might have been one. It's been—" She made a face. "It smells bad." "That's fine. Bad smell usually means it's still alive." Clara moved toward the cellar door. "Show me what you've got." Emma set down her spoon. The next 3 days were a careful negotiation, and not one that anyone discussed out loud. Clara operated on the principle that a household that didn't trust you yet was best approached the way you approached a skittish animal, without sudden movements or declarations of intent. She did what was needed and waited for the results to speak for themselves. The starter, once fed and rested, produced bread by the second morning. Emma said nothing about this but ate 3 slices with butter and stood in the kitchen with an expression she probably didn't know was on her face. The look of someone who had been managing on less than they needed for long enough that something adequate felt like abundance. The garden wasn't a complete loss. Late summer still had some time left in it, and the soil was better than the weeds suggested. Clara pulled and cleared in the mornings before the heat settled in, and by the end of the 3rd day had a section replanted with what was left of the seed stock she found in the barn, turnips and a variety of hard squash that would carry through winter if they came in. The porch support post was the thing that bothered her most, because it was a safety hazard, and also because it was the first thing Gideon Mercer would see when he came up the walk. She found lumber in the barn, measured twice, and put a new post in on the afternoon of the 4th day. Silas came out while she was finishing and stood watching her square it. "I could have done that," he said. "I know. I kept meaning to." "I know that too." She didn't say it unkindly. She drove the last nail and stepped back to check the level. "Didn't mean to step on your work." He was quiet for a moment. "You didn't." He picked up one of the scraps of lumber from the ground and turned it over in his hands. "Ellen always said I had a talent for meaning to do things." Clara looked at him. He was looking at the lumber. "She sounds like she had a pretty direct way of saying things," Clara said. He almost smiled again. "She could strip paint off a wall with 4 words when she wanted to." "Did you like that about her?" He thought about it, rather than just answering. "Usually. Sometimes it was the worst thing in the world." He set the scrap down. "She would have liked you, I think. In that way where she'd have made your life difficult for the first week and then decided you were all right." Clara nodded. She didn't have a response to that felt right, so she didn't offer one. "The girls are—" He started over. "Emma's been different since you've been here. I don't know how to explain it, except she seems less tired," Clara said. He looked at her. "Yeah." "She's been carrying a lot. She'll keep carrying it. That's who she is. But she shouldn't have to carry it alone." Silas was quiet for a long moment. A hawk circled over the south pasture, riding a thermal, getting smaller. "I let things get bad," he said. "After Ellen. I know I did. He stopped. Whatever the end of that sentence was, he didn't seem able to locate it. "I'm trying to not let them get worse." "That's a start," Clara said. Not encouraging, not dismissive, just accurate. He picked up the remaining lumber to carry it back to the barn, and she went inside to start dinner. But on the 6th day, Clara went to town. She went alone, which surprised Silas enough that he asked about it. "I need to work something out," she said, "for supplies." He started to say he had credit at Fitch's, then stopped, apparently remembering that Fitch had just run her out of town in front of 40 people. "I'll manage," Clara said. She took the road in on foot rather than ask for the wagon. It was 6 miles and the morning was cool enough to make it reasonable. She arrived in Harlan's Crossing a little before 10 and went not to Fitch's but to the feed store at the other end of the commercial block, which was run by a man named Cass Doherty, who had the good sense to not have been present for the scene on Decker Street. She had a skill with horses. It was the one concrete marketable thing she'd come up in her life with. She'd spent 2 years with a woman named Vera Sumner, who ran a small training operation in Missouri, before Vera got sick and the operation ended and Clara moved on to the next place. She knew bloodlines and she knew behavioral problems, and she knew the kind of slow patient correction that turned difficult horses into usable ones. Doherty had a problem horse. She'd heard him mention it to someone in passing the day she'd arrived in town 3 weeks ago, before things had gone wrong with Fitch, a purchased young stallion that had developed a vicious habit of striking and that he couldn't get near enough to handle. She offered him a deal. She'd spend a week working the horse, no charge, and in exchange she'd take her pay and feed and goods from the store. Doherty looked at her with the skepticism of a man who has been offered solutions before and watched them fail. "I've had 2 men try," he said. "One of them got a broken arm." "I'm not going to fight him," Clara said. "I'm going to take my time." "A week? Maybe a little more. I'll tell you when I'm done." He thought about it longer than felt strictly necessary. She let him think. "All right," he finally said. "You get hurt. That's on you." "Understood." She spent the first session just standing outside the stallion's pen. Not approaching, not engaging, just being there, present, still, not threatening. The horse watched her with white-rimmed eyes and kept to the far side. She came back the next morning and did the same thing. On the third morning, she stood near the fence and spoke in a low, steady voice about nothing in particular. She talked about the road out to the Hale Ranch and the way the ridge looked at dawn and the particular sound Lucy made when she laughed. The horse didn't come closer, but he stopped keeping his rear to her. Doherty watched from a distance and said nothing. What she hadn't counted on was being seen. Not by Doherty. His seeing her was the point, but by other people. The town was not large, and a woman working a problem horse that 2 men had failed to handle was the kind of thing people noticed and talked about. By the end of the first week at the feed store, people who had watched her walk out of town with her bag knew she was still in the area. Some of them knew she was out at the Hale Ranch. That was when Nora Aldridge, who had turned her eyes to her shoes while Fitch ran Clara out, went to visit Temperance Whitmore. Temperance Whitmore was the wife of the county land commissioner and the closest thing Harlan's Crossing had to an arbiter of social standing. She had a parlor that served as an informal courthouse for the town's social judgments, and she had a network of connections that reached into the county offices. She was not a cruel woman in the theatrical sense. She was the more common kind, the one who tells herself she's protecting the community while drawing lines that keep certain people out. A woman with no history, no family, no standing, Nora told her, over tea that Clara obviously wasn't there to drink. Living out at Silas Hale's place, with those 2 little girls. Temperance stirred her tea. What kind of woman has no history? That's exactly the question. And there's an inspection coming. 6 weeks, they say, maybe less. Temperance set her spoon on the saucer. Someone should speak to Mercer. Nora nodded, satisfied that the right wheels were turning. I thought the same. Outside, the hawk that Clara had watched from the Hale Ranch porch 2 days ago, or one very much like it, was still circling, patient and unhurried, riding the air above a town that had already decided what it thought of Clara Bennett and wasn't looking for any information to change its mind. She didn't know any of this yet. She was standing outside Doherty's pen in the late afternoon light, watching the stallion take a slow step toward her for the first time. His nostrils flared, his ears up, deciding. She stood still. She let him decide. That was, in the end, the only thing she knew how to do. Stand still. Let things resolve themselves at their own pace. She'd been doing it her whole life, waiting for a place to decide she was acceptable, or for the moment she'd have to pack her bag and move on. She just hadn't let herself feel too much either way before. That was the thing about this particular situation that made it different. Something about Emma's carefully made-up bed and Lucy's head on her shoulder and the sound of Silas saying you'd have liked her about a woman she'd never meet. Something in all of it had gotten under her guard in those first 6 days in a way she hadn't expected and didn't know yet how to name. The stallion took another step forward. She didn't move. She breathed. The evening light came in low across the feed store yard and turned everything it touched a shade of gold that would be gone in 10 minutes. The stallion's name, according to Doherty's records, was Cinder. He'd been purchased at a spring auction from a seller who described him as high-spirited but sound, which was the kind of thing people said about horses they were glad to be rid of. By the time Clara had been working him for 10 days, she understood what had made him this way. Not meanness, not bad breeding, but a history of being handled by people who confused force with authority. Someone had scared him badly, more than once, and fear that gets buried deep enough eventually comes back up as aggression. She knew the pattern. She'd seen it in animals and in people, both. On the 11th morning, Cinder let her put a hand on his neck. Doherty was watching from the fence. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, "I'll be damned." "He's not fixed," Clara said. "He's just starting to trust. Those aren't the same thing." "How much longer?" "Another week, maybe. I don't want to rush it and have him go backward." Doherty nodded slowly. He was a practical man, and practical men respected results. "The deal stands, whatever you need from the store." She took a careful inventory that evening, what the ranch needed against what she could reasonably claim without it feeling like she was stripping Doherty's shelves. Flour, salt, dried beans, lamp oil, a sack of oats, 2 tins of lard, some nails of the size she'd run short of on the porch repair. She had it loaded in a borrowed handcart and was 3 blocks down the road before she registered that she'd just walked through Harlan's Crossing in the middle of the day without anyone saying a word to her. Not welcoming, not friendly, but silent, which was an improvement over the alternative. She was wrong to think the silence meant anything had changed. She just didn't know that yet. Tup. Emma was supposed to go back to school. Clara had been thinking about it since the first week. The girl's absence was both practically harmful and, in the context of the county inspection, potentially damaging. One of the things an inspector like Mercer would look at was whether the children in a household were receiving proper education. Emma staying home to cook and clean was understandable, given the circumstances of the past 14 months, but understandable and acceptable were 2 different things in the eyes of county records. The problem was that Emma didn't want to go. Not because she disliked school. Clara had found 3 notebooks in the girls' room, filled with careful handwriting and arithmetic that suggested she was further along than her grade level. She didn't want to go because going meant leaving, and leaving meant trusting that things wouldn't fall apart while she was gone. Clara waited until a Wednesday morning when Silas was out in the south pasture mending fence, and Lucy was occupied with the set of carved wooden animals she kept in a box under her bed. She poured 2 cups of coffee. Emma drank coffee, which Clara had registered without comment the first morning, and set one at the girl's elbow. Emma looked at it, then at Clara. "I want to talk about school," Clara said. Emma's expression closed up. "I can't go back right now." "Why not?" "Because someone has to be here." "I'm here?" "You don't know how things work yet." She said it without hostility, just matter of fact. "The stove has a draft problem if you let the fire get too low. The well handle sticks in the morning until the temperature comes up. Lucy won't eat if she thinks you're upset about something. She watches faces. She always has. If she thinks—" "Emma." The girl stopped. "I know about the stove," Clara said. "I figured out the well handle on day 2, and I know about Lucy and faces." She paused. "You've been running this household since your mother died. You've done it well, but part of what makes this inspection go the right way is you being in school. On the record, as a child who is being educated and cared for, not a child who's been pulled into adult work." Emma looked at her coffee cup. Her jaw was tight. "It's not that I don't think you can handle it," Clara continued. "I know you can. I'm asking you to let me handle it for a while so you don't have to." "You might leave." There it was. The thing underneath all the other things. Clara let it sit for a moment before she answered. "I might," she said. "I'm not going to make you a promise I can't guarantee. But I'm here now, and I'm telling you I intend to still be here when you get home today." Emma looked up at her. She had her father's gray eyes and her mother's directness, and right now both of those things were pointed at Clara like a measuring instrument. "You're not going to tell me everything's going to be fine," Emma said. "No." "Most adults do that." "I know, it's not useful." A long pause. Emma picked up her coffee cup and drank, set it down. "I'll need to leave by 7:30 to make the first bell." I'll have something ready before 7:30. Emma stood up. She didn't say thank you, which Clara had started to understand was the family's way. They showed things rather than said them. What she did was take her coffee cup to the basin and wash it and set it on the drying board, which was something she'd never done when she was the one running everything. She was at school by first bell. With Emma gone in the mornings, the rhythm of the ranch changed. It was Clara and Lucy and the work of the house. And then in the late afternoon, Emma would come back with the smell of schoolroom chalk on her and would sit at the kitchen table doing problems while Clara finished dinner. And it had the quality of a normal thing, which was strange, because normal was not what Clara's life had generally produced. Lucy was an easier child than she looked like she'd be. She was quiet in a particular way. Not withdrawn, but interior. A child who observed more than she spoke and then said unexpected things when she did. She helped with small tasks without being asked, which meant someone had taught her that, which meant Ellen Hale had been a particular kind of mother. On a Thursday afternoon, Lucy looked up from the pile of dried beans she was helping sort and said, "My mama used to sing when she did this." Clara kept working. "Did she?" She had a low voice. Not pretty like singing voices, but nice. Lucy sorted a bad bean out of the pile. "Pa can't sing at all. He tried once and Emma told him to stop." "That sounds about right," Clara said. Lucy studied her with those serious eyes. "Can you sing?" "I'm in about the same category as your father." Lucy appeared to consider this. "That's okay," she said, and went back to sorting. These were the things that accumulated in the first 2 weeks. Small things. The kind that don't feel like much while they're happening and only show their weight later. But Silas was getting better at being present, in small increments. It wasn't dramatic. There was no single morning where he came downstairs a different man. But Clara noticed, the way she noticed everything in a new place by necessity, that he started coming in for dinner on time instead of 40 minutes after. That he started answering Lucy's questions at the table rather than giving half answers while looking at something else. That he fixed the hinge on the kitchen cabinet door that had been hanging wrong since before Clara arrived, apparently, based on the wear pattern on the frame. One evening, she came in from the barn to find him sitting on the porch floor with Lucy, the two of them side by side with their backs against the house wall, watching the sunset do something complicated and orange over the western ridge. He looked up when he heard Clara's boots on the step. "There's food," she said. "We know," Lucy said. "We're watching the sky." Clara looked at the sky. It was in fact doing something worth watching. She sat down on the step, not beside them, but not distant either, and watched it too. After a while, Silas said, "I'm going to re-shingle the east side of the barn roof before first frost. It's been leaking." "I can help with that," Claire said. "You don't have to." "I know." He didn't argue the point. The sky continued doing its thing. "Emma said you convinced her to go back to school," he said. "She convinced herself. I just pointed out some reasons. She told me what you said, about not making promises you can't keep." He was quiet for a moment. That was the right thing to say to her. Better than... He stopped. Ellen got sick fast. She didn't have time to prepare the girls. Emma was there when it happened, and Ellen had been saying she'd be fine, right up until she wasn't. He said it to the sunset, not to Clara. "Emma has a hard time with reassurance now." I noticed. Most people don't. They just think she's difficult. She's not difficult. She's just been let down by certainties. Clara looked at her hands. That teaches a person to prefer honesty over comfort. Silas turned to look at her then, in the fading light. She felt him looking, but didn't turn to meet it. "Where did you grow up?" he asked. She'd been waiting for this question and had been, in some half-conscious way, deciding what she'd say to it when it came. "Different places," she said. "Foster homes, mostly. I was moved around a fair amount." "When did you stop being moved?" "When I was old enough to move myself." He seemed to think about this. Lucy had fallen asleep against his arm, which had happened without either of them noticing. "I'm sorry," he said. "It was what it was. I'm not looking for sorry." "I know. I said it anyway." He looked back at the ridge. "My mother always said I apologized for things that weren't my fault and failed to apologize for things that were." "Was she right?" "About half the time." He shifted slightly, careful not to disturb Lucy. Clara, this situation, what Mercer is going to look at, I want you to know I didn't ask you here as a strategy. I mean, I saw what you did for Lucy in the street, and I knew we needed help, and I made a decision fast. But I don't want you to feel like... He seemed to run out of words. I don't know what I want you to feel like. I just don't want you to think you're a piece I moved on a board. Clara looked at him now. He was looking at the last sliver of sun on the ridge. I don't think that, she said. All right. Silas. He looked at her. Thank you for saying it anyway, she said. He nodded once. Something in his face was different in the low light, less guarded than it was in daylight. She looked away first. 3 weeks before the inspection was scheduled, the campaign against Clara began in earnest. She didn't know it was organized. She found out in pieces. The first piece was Emma, coming home from school with a quietness that was different from her usual interior kind. This was the quietness of someone who had been through something and was figuring out how to handle it alone. Clara didn't push. She put dinner on the table and waited. After Lucy was in bed, Emma came and sat at the kitchen table, and Clara poured her a cup of tea and sat across from her. Mrs. Holt said something today, Emma said. Mrs. Holt was the school teacher. Clara had heard her name but had no particular impression of her yet. What kind of something? Emma turned her cup in her hands. She pulled me aside after class. She said she'd heard that we had... She called it a transient woman living at the house. She wanted to know if I was... She said comfortable. Like it was a question about comfort. Emma's voice had that particular edge that young people develop when adults condescend to them. She said the community was concerned. About what specifically? About you. About your background. She said a woman with no roots. Emma looked up. I told her you'd fix the porch. Despite everything, Clara felt something close to a smile. How did she take that? She said a porch wasn't the same as character. She's not wrong, technically. Emma set her cup down. Are people trying to get you in trouble? Clara measured her answer. Some people might be. When something's unfamiliar, some people decide it's a threat before they have any evidence. That's stupid. It's human. Stupid and human are pretty close neighbors. Emma chewed on that. What do? We do what we're already doing. We get the place ready for Mercer's inspection. We make sure you and Lucy are in school, eating well, living in a house that's in decent shape. The actual evidence is what matters in the end. But you said things aren't always fair. I said I wouldn't lie to you. Things aren't always fair, but Mercer's coming here to look at the house and talk to your father and see how you're living, not to listen to what Temperance Whitmore's parlor thinks. Emma blinked. How do you know about Temperance Whitmore? Dougherty mentioned her and 2 other people in town who weren't trying to. She has a particular reputation. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, she came to the house once, after Mom died. She offered to take us, me and Lucy. She said it would be a kindness to Pa, to take the burden off him. Her voice was very level. He told her no, but nicely, because that's Pa. I wanted to... She seemed to decide against describing what she'd wanted. She's been watching this house ever since. Clara absorbed this. The shape of the opposition was getting clearer. She's the one who filed the report with the county. Probably, Emma said. I always thought so, but Pa never said. Outside, the wind had come up, moving through the gap in the ridge with a sound like something being settled from a distance. The kitchen was warm from the stove, and the lamp made a circle of yellow light that didn't reach the corners. Emma looked young in it. Actually young. Not the functional adult she'd been performing as for 14 months. Go to bed, Clara said. You've got school. Emma stood and took her cup to the basin. At the door, she paused. Clara. Yeah. I'm glad Pa asked you to stay. She said it quickly, like something that was easier to say while moving. And then she was gone up the stairs, and Clara was left alone with the sound of the wind and the lamp and her tea going cold. She worked the problem the way she'd learned to work every practical problem, by starting with what she could actually affect. The house needed 2 more things before it was in the shape it needed to be. The kitchen ceiling had a water stain from the old roof leak that needed to be addressed, and the cellar stairs had 2 rotted treads that were a genuine safety issue. She fixed the stairs first because they were dangerous, and because the inspector would certainly look at the cellar. The ceiling she whitewashed over a weekend, which didn't eliminate the stain, but reduced it to something that looked like an old repair rather than an ongoing problem. Which it was, since the roof had been fixed. She sent Emma to school every day without fail. She made sure Lucy ate breakfast before she went and combed her hair properly and had clean clothes. These were not difficult things, but they were consistent things, and consistency was what the inspection would measure. She continued working Cinder at Doherty's until the horse was handleable, which took another 10 days past her original estimate, but produced a result that Doherty called nothing short of a miracle, and she called patience and time. She took her remaining credit from the store and used it on a bolt of heavy canvas fabric she'd found stacked behind the oilcloth rolls, which she used to repair the cover on the wagon and the leaking section of roof over the wood storage. She was not a seamstress and the work was ugly, but it held. Silas watched all of this with a combination of gratitude and what she'd begun to understand was a specific kind of guilt. The guilt of a man who knew he should have been managing these things himself and was now watching someone else do them, and couldn't quite decide whether to be relieved or ashamed. She didn't address it directly, but one morning she handed him a list. He looked at it. "What's this?" "Things I need you to do before Mercer comes. The fence line on the north side, the water trough, the latch on the chicken coop. It's been loose, and if Lucy gets out there and the coop door swings open, she could have chickens all over the yard when the inspector pulls up." He looked at the list a little longer. "You're giving me homework. I'm giving you things you're better at than I am. I don't know fence line and I don't know the water trough situation. You do." He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He didn't say anything. But the north fence was repaired by the end of the week, and the water trough was scrubbed and the latch on the chicken coop was fixed with a new piece of iron that looked like it had come from a careful hand and a full hour's attention. The third thing that happened before the inspection arrived was the visit from Temperance Whitmore herself. Clara was alone at the house. Silas in the far pasture, Emma at school, Lucy at the schoolhouse as well because the school children had a half-day program that Tuesdays. She was in the garden cutting back the last of the spent squash vines when she heard the sound of a buggy in the yard. The woman who got down was somewhere between 50 and 60, dressed in town clothes that were several steps above what anyone else in the county wore for a Tuesday morning call. She had the posture of someone who had been told from childhood that the way you held yourself was a statement about your worth, and had believed it. Her face was handsome in an angular way, and her expression was the kind of compose that takes effort to maintain. Clara set down her shears and waited. "Miss Bennet," the woman said. Not a question. She'd come knowing who Clara was. "Mrs. Whitmore." The woman didn't seem surprised to be recognized. She looked around the yard, at the new porch post, at the repaired wagon cover, at the swept step. She took it in with the systematic thoroughness of someone who was here on a specific errand. "I thought we should speak," Whitmore said. "All right. I've known the Hale family for years. Ellen was a dear friend. These girls—" She let the sentence end there, as though the connection was its own argument. "I want what's best for them." "I'm sure you do," Clara said. She meant it neutrally, and it came out neutral, which seemed to be the wrong answer. Whitmore had expected either deference or defensiveness, and was briefly wrong-footed by neither. "The community has concerns," she said, recovering, "about a woman of your—" A pause, deliberate. "Background. Living in close quarters with 2 young girls and their widowed father, with an inspection coming." "What kind of concerns?" "You have no references, no family, no history in this county." She adjusted her gloves, a small gesture of management. "You appeared from nowhere." "I appeared from 40 miles north of here," Clara said. "Which is not nothing, it's just not Harlan's Crossing." Whitmore looked at her with those composed, measuring eyes. Inspector Mercer takes the social environment of a household very seriously, not just the physical condition, the character of the people in it. "I imagine so." "A woman who has lived as transient as you have lived raises questions that an inspector will ask." Clara took a breath, held it for a second. "Mrs. Whitmore, I appreciate that you came to say this to my face instead of only to other people. That's more than some would do." She looked at the woman evenly. But, what you're doing right now is trying to remove me from this house before the inspection. Because you want a different outcome than what an inspector walking through this house today would see. Whitmore's composure held, but something moved beneath it. I'm trying to protect these children. I know you believe that, Clara said, but the children are in school, they're fed. The house is in better shape than it's been in over a year. Silas is working the ranch. What exactly are you protecting them from? A long silence. A mockingbird somewhere in the cottonwoods along the creek was running through its repertoire, bits of other birds' songs stitched together. You won't always be here, Whitmore said finally. You don't know that. Women like you. She stopped. Women like me, Clara repeated. Not angry, asking. Whitmore's jaw was tight. Whatever she'd been going to say, she changed her mind about it. I've seen what happens to children when the adults in their lives aren't stable. I've seen families come apart. So have I, Clara said. From the inside. Something shifted in the other woman's face, very slightly. I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing, Clara said. If Mercer comes and looks at this house and decides it's not suitable, I won't stand in his way. But I don't think that's what he's going to find. She picked up her shears from the ground. I need to finish the garden before it gets too hot. You're welcome to come inside and have coffee if you'd like. Whitmore did not want coffee. She stood for another moment, a woman accustomed to having the final word, finding herself without one. And then she got back in her buggy and drove toward town. Clara watched her go, then went back to the squash vines. Her hands were not quite steady. She made them do the work anyway. That night she sat on the porch in the dark after everyone was in bed, which had become a habit she hadn't planned. The sky out here was different from town sky. Wider, more committed, the stars doing their serious cold work overhead without any competition from lamps or windows. Silas's voice from behind her, quiet. You're up late. She didn't turn. So are you. He came out and sat in the other chair, the one with the split armrest that neither of them had fixed yet. She heard rather than saw him settle into it. Emma told me Whitmore came today, he said. Emma wasn't here. Lucy told her. Lucy watched from the window. A pause. How was it? Manageable. Did she threaten you? She implied things. It's different. Clara leaned her head back. She's going to contact Mercer. If she hasn't already. I know. He was quiet. I should have handled her a long time ago. She's been circling since Ellen died. His voice had an edge she didn't often hear in it. She came to my house 3 months after the funeral and told me my girls would be better off with a proper family, as if I was already gone. What did you say? Something polite that I shouldn't have. He shifted in his chair. I was not in a good state. I wasn't thinking right for a long time after Ellen. I know that. I know what it looked like from outside. You're thinking right now. That's debatable. She heard the effort behind it, the almost joke that covered the more honest statement. The house is ready, she said. Not perfect, but honest. Mercer can look anywhere he wants, and what he'll see is a family that's working. Because of you. Because of all of us. She turned her head to look at him then, in the dark. You fixed the fence. You gave me a list. You did the work. He was looking at the sky. In the low light, his face was less guarded than it ever was in daylight, and she thought again what she'd thought that first evening on the porch, that he was a man who had more in him than he'd been able to access for the past year, and some of it was finally finding its way back out. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks, he agreed. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, which was that 3 weeks was not very long and that what Whitmore had set in motion might be faster than what they'd built here. The word might was doing a lot of work in that thought, and they both knew it. The mockingbird had gone to sleep. The stars turned their slow wheel overhead. After a while, Silas went back inside. Clara stayed on the porch a little longer, listening to the ranch settle into night around her. The cattle moving in the dark pasture, the horses in the barn, the creek running low over its stones down in the draw. All of it ordinary. All of it, for right now, hers to keep watch over. She wasn't going to let it go without a fight. She hadn't decided that consciously, but sitting there in the dark, she understood it was already decided, the way certain things are decided without your awareness, in the time before you're willing to admit what you want. She went inside. She went to bed. She lay on the right side of the mattress, the way Emma had told her, and looked at the ceiling in the dark, and counted the days. Gideon Mercer arrived on a Wednesday morning, which was not the day they'd been told to expect him. They'd been told Friday. Clara had spent the better part of Tuesday evening making sure everything was in the order she'd intended. The cellar stairs solid underfoot, the kitchen floor scrubbed to the grain of the wood, the girls' room clean, and their school things laid out. She'd even gotten the kitchen ceiling whitewashed to a shade that no longer read as damage at all, just old paint. She'd gone to bed Tuesday night with the particular exhaustion of someone who has done everything they can think of and knows it may not be enough. Wednesday morning, she was in the yard splitting wood when the county wagon came over the ridge. She heard it before she saw it, the particular sound of iron-rimmed wheels on the dry, rutted road, and she straightened and turned and watched it come down into the valley. Silas was in the barn. Emma had left for school 40 minutes ago. Lucy was inside finishing her breakfast. The wagon pulled into the yard, and the man who got down was not what she'd constructed in her imagination. She'd built Mercer into something large and official, a bureaucratic force in a good suit. The actual Gideon Mercer was medium height and thin, with the slight stoop of someone who spent too much time at a desk and knew it, and a face that was neither kind nor unkind, just watchful. He wore a brown coat and carried a leather satchel, and he looked at the house and the yard with the systematic attention of a man who had been trained to see what was actually there rather than what people wanted him to see. He noticed her before she said anything. "Miss Bennett?" he said. "Careful. Neither warm nor cold." "Yes." She set the splitting maul against the block. "We were expecting you Friday." "I adjusted my schedule. I find that unannounced visits give a more accurate picture." He said it without apology. "Is Mr. Hale available?" Silas had come out of the barn at the sound of the wagon. He crossed the yard toward them, and Clara watched him adjust his face from whatever he'd been feeling. Surprise, nerves, probably both, into something that was trying to be simply present. "Mr. Mercer," he said, and offered his hand. Mercer shook it. "I'll need to see the house. Speak with both of you separately, and the girls, if they're available." "Emma's at school," Silas said. "Lucy's inside." Mercer's expression didn't change, but he wrote something in the small notebook he produced from his coat pocket. "Emma is currently enrolled and attending?" "Every day," Clara said. He looked at her. "And what is your role in this household, Miss Bennett?" "Housekeeper," she said. Then, because it wasn't quite accurate, "and whatever else needs doing." He wrote that down too. The inspection of the house took an hour and 20 minutes. Mercer moved through it methodically and without comment, which was harder to read than either approval or criticism would have been. He opened cabinet doors and checked the cellar stairs, both treads she'd replaced, solid and new, and looked at the girls' room and the state of the pantry and the water situation and the condition of the stove. He stood in the kitchen for a long time looking at nothing in particular, which Clara eventually understood was him listening to how the house sounded, to what the general atmosphere of it communicated. Lucy sat at the kitchen table throughout the house portion of the inspection, watching Mercer with the focused attention she gave most things, and when he came to examine the kitchen, she said without preamble, "I know where everything is." Mercer looked at her. "Do you?" "The flour's in the blue tin, the sugar's in the white one. They look the same, but they're not." She pointed at the shelf. "Clara put labels on them, but I can tell anyway because the sugar tin has a dent on the side." Mercer looked at the tins. They did indeed have labels, in Clara's practical handwriting. He made a note. "Who taught you where things are?" "Clara mostly. Mom did before. I remembered most of it already." "Do you like living here?" Lucy looked at him with the expression of a child who is deciding how seriously to take a question. "It's my house," she said. "Where else would I live?" Something shifted briefly in Mercer's face. Not a smile exactly, but something in that direction. He wrote in his notebook and moved on. He spoke with Silas first, in the parlor, with the door closed. Clara took Lucy out to the garden, and they worked the last of the fall clearing and she did not try to hear what was being said through the walls. She focused on Lucy and the garden and kept her hands moving. "Is that man going to take us away?" Lucy asked. She was pulling up a spent tomato steak with both hands, leaning her full weight into it. Clara didn't hesitate. "He's here to check that you're being taken care of, and if he thinks we are. Then he goes back to the county and files his report, and that's the end of it." Lucy got the steak free and stumbled back 2 steps, recovered. "And if he doesn't think we are?" "He does think you are," Clara said. "He's been through the house. He can see how you're living." "But what if someone told him something bad about us?" The way she said it was too specific to be hypothetical. Children that age hear more than anyone thinks they do. Clara straightened and looked at her. "Did you hear something?" Lucy picked dirt off the steak and didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. "Hey!" Clara went to a knee in front of her. "You can tell me." Lucy looked at her with those dark, serious eyes. "I heard Mrs. Holt tell another teacher that the county inspector was coming because something was wrong at our house. She said—" She paused, working something out. "She said you were a dangerous influence." Clara held that for a moment. "What do you think about that?" Lucy appeared to consider it genuinely. "I think Mrs. Holt doesn't know you," she said. "She said the same thing about the Pedersen dog last spring, and the Pedersen dog is the nicest dog in the county." Clara stood up. "Let's get back to the garden." Lucy went back to the garden. Clara stood for a moment looking at the house, at the solid porch post, the clean windows, the neat stack of wood, and let herself feel the particular combination of anger and fear that had been sitting in her chest since the Wednesday morning wagon came over the ridge 2 hours early. Then she went back to work. When Mercer called her in, Silas came out to take Lucy, and Clara went into the parlor and sat in the chair across from the inspector and waited. He had his notebook open on his knee. He looked at her for a moment before he spoke, the way he'd looked at the house, taking inventory. "You arrived in Harlan's Crossing approximately 7 weeks ago," he said. "That's right. You had no prior connection to the Hale family. None. And within 2 days of your arrival, mister, Hale invited you to live here." "Within 3 days," she said, "and he didn't invite me exactly. He offered work and a roof." "There's a distinction." Mercer's pen was still. "What work?" "Household management, cooking, cleaning, repairs I had the skill for. I've also been working with Doherty's feed, training a difficult horse. That arrangement provided supplies for the household." He wrote, "You have no permanent address prior to Harlan's Crossing." "No. No family connections in this region. No family connections anywhere." He looked up at that. A small pause. "I grew up in foster placements," she said, before he could frame it as a question. "Multiple households, different counties, different states. I left the last one at 17, and I've been managing my own way since then." She kept her voice level, not defensive, just factual. "I'm aware that's the kind of history that raises questions." "It does raise questions," he said. "The county has received a communication from a private party who declined to be named, which I'll note is their right, expressing concern that a woman of unstable background is living in a household with 2 minor children and a widowed father." Clara nodded slowly. "What kind of concern specifically?" "That your lack of roots represents a risk to the girl's emotional stability. That you could leave at any time. That you may have reasons for being here that aren't apparent." He said it with the flat professionalism of someone reading from a description they didn't write. "That your presence constitutes an inappropriate situation." She looked at him. "The inappropriate situation being that I'm an unmarried woman living in a widower's house." That was implied. "I sleep in the room at the end of the upstairs hall," she said. "The door has a latch. Silas Hale has been nothing but correct toward me, and I toward him. I don't think you need to spend much energy on that particular concern." He made a note. "The concern about your background and potential instability is the more material one." "I know." She looked at her hands in her lap, then back up at him. "Mr. Mercer, I could defend myself against that. I could tell you I intend to stay, that I've been consistent since I arrived, that the household is in better condition than it was 6 weeks ago. All of which is true." She paused. "But I think the more useful thing I can tell you is this." He waited. "I know what it feels like to be a child in a house where no one is quite sure they want you there. I know what it feels like to watch adults make decisions about your life in rooms you're not allowed into. I know what it feels like to have someone look at you and see a problem to be solved rather than a person. She wasn't angry saying it. That was the thing she'd worked out on the porch the night before, in the dark. That saying it angry would make it sound like a complaint, and it wasn't a complaint. It was just true. I know those things because I lived them, which means I also know exactly what these girls need and exactly what would hurt them. And the thing that would hurt them, more than the house needing repairs, more than their father struggling to find his feet again, is being taken away from the home they know and put somewhere unfamiliar by people who mean well but don't know them. The room was quiet. Mercer's pen had been still for the last 30 seconds. He was looking at her, not with the inventory look, something else, something that suggested her answer had arrived in a place he hadn't expected it to go. You're saying your experience of instability gives you particular insight, he said. I'm saying I know the difference between a house that's in trouble and a house that's in repair. This one is in repair. There's a difference. He looked down at his notebook. He wrote something slowly. She couldn't read what it was from across the room. The older girl, he said finally. Emma. I'd like to speak with her. She'll be home by 4, Clara said. The wait between Mercer's interview with Clara and Emma's arrival from school was the longest 3 hours she could remember in recent history. She made lunch. She made it carefully, the kind of meal that would hold if it needed to. A thick soup with the last of the summer vegetables and good bread and preserves from the cellar that she'd put up herself in late August. She wasn't cooking for the inspector exactly. She was cooking because her hands needed something to do, and because soup and bread was the most honest argument for a functioning household she could think of. Silas sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and watched her work. Mercer was on the porch with his notebook. Lucy was in her room, instructed to stay there and play, which she was doing with a compliance that suggested she understood the gravity of the situation better than they'd told her. How did it go? Silas asked, low. I told him the truth. All of it? Most of it. She stirred the soup. He's not an unfair man. I don't think he is. But someone got to him first with a particular version of who I am, and he's trying to reconcile that version with what he's seen here this morning. What version did they give him? Unstable woman, no background, potential flight risk, inappropriate situation. She listed them without heat. The usual. Silas set his cup down. Clara, it's all right. I expected it. She had, actually. Not in detail, but in shape. She'd been in enough situations to know that when you came from nowhere and tried to make something in a place that had already decided what it thought of you, the attack would come through your history. It always came through your history, because that was where the gaps were, where the story could be filled in by other people. It's not all right, he said. It's not. He seemed to be choosing words carefully. What you said to me on the porch, about growing up in foster homes, I didn't know it was going to be used against you. I didn't tell you so you could protect it. I told you because you asked. She tasted the soup, added salt. Whatever Mercer decides, I said what I needed to say in there. I can't control the rest. Silas was quiet. He turned his coffee cup in his hands, the same thing Emma did when she was thinking, which Clara noticed and filed away. I was going to say, he started, then stopped. I want you to know, whatever happens today, you change things here for the better, regardless of what he decides. Let's wait and see what he decides before we start that conversation, Clara said. He nodded. The soup simmered. The clock on the mantel ticked. Choke. Emma came through this door at 4:10 and understood the situation in approximately 4 seconds. She took in Mercer on the porch, her father's face at the window, and Clara's careful stillness in the kitchen doorway, and her own face did the thing Clara had seen it do before, went composed and wary and very, very still. Emma, Mercer said from the porch, I'm Gideon Mercer. I'd like to talk with you for a few minutes. Emma looked at Clara. Clara gave her a small nod. Nothing instructive, just present. All right, Emma said. She sat across from him on the porch the way Clara had sat across from him in the parlor, and Clara went inside and did not watch through the window, because Emma had the right to say whatever she was going to say without anyone monitoring it. What she heard, in pieces, through the open kitchen window, was this: "Your father seems to be managing better than the county's first report suggested. He was in a bad place for a while. He's better now." "What changed?" A pause. Clara came. "What specifically did she do?" Another pause, longer. Clara stirred the soup and listened to the silence. "She didn't fix everything," Emma said finally. "I want you to understand that. She didn't come in and make everything perfect. The first week she was here, she got the bread starter working, and she repaired the porch post, and she told me to go back to school. And none of those things they're not dramatic. But she was there, every morning, doing the next thing. And Pa started doing the next thing too because someone else was also doing it." A pause. "Do you know what that's like? When you've been the only one keeping things going for so long that you forgot there's supposed to be more than one person?" Silence from Mercer. "I'm 14, Emma said. Her voice was very level. "I'm not supposed to be the one keeping things going. I know that. But I was. Because someone had to be. And now I'm not the only one. And that's—" Her voice changed slightly, just a fraction. "That matters." Clara put the spoon down on the counter. She looked at the wall. She had been doing this, the controlling of her own face when things moved her, since she was younger than Emma. It was a skill you developed when you'd grown up in rooms where showing too much could be used against you. She was using it now, in a kitchen in the Hale Ranch, because the alternative was being found crying over a soup pot by a county inspector. She picked the spoon back up. Mercer asked a few more questions. Emma answered them in that same level voice, the one that didn't perform but didn't hide. At one point, he asked about Clara's comings and goings, whether she was reliable, whether she kept her word. And Emma said, "She told me she'd be here when I got home from school. She's been here every day." The conversation wound down. Mercer thanked her. Emma came into the kitchen and went straight to the basin and washed her hands for longer than her hands needed washing. Clara said nothing and handed her a bowl of soup when she turned around, and Emma took it and sat down and ate half of it before she said quietly, "Was that okay?" "It was exactly right," Clara said. Emma nodded and finished her soup. Mercer asked to speak with Silas one more time before he left, which he did in the yard, the two of them standing by the county wagon in the late afternoon light. Clara watched from the kitchen window. She could see the angle of their posture, not their faces. Mercer did most of the talking. Silas listened with the particular stillness of a man absorbing information he hasn't decided how to feel about yet. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes. Mercer shook Silas's hand. He got into his wagon, he drove up the ridge road and over the top, and was gone. Silas came inside. "Well," Clara said. He stood in the kitchen doorway. He looked tired in a different way than he'd looked tired before. Not the grinding, ongoing exhaustion of the past year, but the particular aftermath of being very tense for a very long time and then having the tension release. He said he'd file his report within the week, Silas said. He said the household was in materially better condition than his first visit. He said, he stopped, collected himself. He said the girls appeared healthy and engaged, and that Emma was clearly receiving proper education. He said those were the primary indicators he was required to assess. "That sounds like the right things," Clara said carefully. He also said, Silas looked at her directly. He said whatever you told him in there, it was the most honest accounting of a personal history he'd heard from someone in your position. He said most people try to hide the difficult things. He said you didn't. Clara looked at the soup pot. "Hiding doesn't work anyway. It just lets other people fill in the gaps." "What did you tell him?" She turned around. Silas was still in the doorway watching her with those gray eyes. "I told him I grew up in foster care, multiple placements. That I knew what it felt like to be a child waiting for adults to decide things about you. That I knew the difference between a house that's failing and a house that's working its way back." He was quiet. "That's what I said," she said. "Whether it helped or hurt, I don't know." "He said it helped," Silas said quietly. He said, he stopped. He looked like a man fighting with something. "He said you were the first person today who seemed to be thinking about the girls rather than about themselves." The kitchen was warm. The soup was still simmering. Lucy had come to the top of the stairs and was listening. Clara could hear the creak of the particular board 2 steps from the landing, which Lucy always hit and always failed to notice. "Go wash up for dinner," Clara called up the stairs. A small, guilty scramble, then footsteps, then water running. Silas leaned against the doorframe. He looked, for the first time since she'd known him, something close to untensed. "Thank you," he said. "I know you said wait until we know what he decides, but I'm saying it now anyway." "You did the work?" Clara said. "The fence, the trough, the latch?" That's what he saw when he looked at the place. "Clara." "Silas." He almost smiled. "You're going to make this difficult, aren't you? Accepting thanks." "I'm going to finish making dinner. That's what I'm going to do." He pushed off the doorframe. "I'll set the table." It was the first time he'd offered that. She noticed and didn't say so, and he set the table and she finished the soup, and when Emma came down from her room and Lucy came from washing her hands, and they all sat down together, the kitchen had a quality to it that Clara had felt before, briefly, in other places, and had always been wrong to let herself feel too much of, because other places had always ended. She felt it anyway. She was tired of being careful about things that were already happening. Bombed. The week waiting for Mercer's report was its own specific kind of hard. Not the hard of the past month, not the physical work and the organizing and the getting ready. This was the hard of having done what you could and now waiting to find out if it was enough, which is a different kind of suffering because there is nothing for your hands to do. Silas went back to the ranch work. Clara kept the house and went twice more to Doherty's to finish out some minor remaining work with Cinder, who was now fully handleable and had been with some patience turned over to Doherty's 12-year-old son, who was delighted. Doherty pressed an extra $2 into her hand on her last visit, which she tried to refuse, and he wouldn't accept the refusal. "Fair's fair," he said. "That horse is worth 3 times what I paid for him now." She took the $2. She didn't spend them. She put them in the tin on the nightstand next to the folding knife and thought about the fact that it was the first money she'd been paid in 3 months and that it felt different than money usually felt. More real. Something about the horse, maybe. The knowing that she'd fixed something that had been considered broken. Or something about the knowing that she was going to have a place to bring the money back to. She didn't examine that too closely. On the 6th day after Mercer's visit, a letter arrived via the post rider. Emma brought it from the mailbox at the end of the drive. She always checked the mail, had done it since she could reach the box, and she brought it inside without opening it and set it on the kitchen table and stood back. And then Lucy came in and saw the letter, and the room got very quiet. Silas came in from outside, saw their faces, saw the letter. He picked it up. He turned it over. The county seal was on the back. Clara stood at the stove with a dish towel in her hands. She did not tell him to open it. She did not say anything. He opened it. He read it. He read it slowly. Too slowly for something short, which meant either it was long or he was reading it twice. She watched his face and could not read it. Then he set the letter on the table and looked up, and his face was doing the thing she'd seen it do only once before. On the street in town when he'd found Lucy unharmed in Clara's arms. That particular collision of relief and something more private. "The case is closed," he said. His voice came out slightly wrong, too controlled. "Favorable assessment. No further action required." He picked the letter back up and looked at it again, as though he needed to confirm the words hadn't changed. "The county considers the household suitable and stable." Lucy said, "Does that mean we stay?" "Yeah," Silas said. "That means you stay." Lucy sat down on the kitchen floor immediately, which was her particular response to large news, and pressed both palms flat on the boards and said nothing. Emma stood very still for a long moment. Then she sat down at the table and put her face in her hands, not crying exactly, or maybe crying, but quietly, the way she did everything, without making it into something anyone else had to manage. Clara hung the dish towel on its hook by the stove. She looked at the letter on the table. She looked at Lucy on the floor with her palms down, and at Emma with her face hidden, and at Silas, who was looking back at her. She looked away first. She went to the stove and turned the heat down under the pot that was beginning to boil over. Her hands were shaking slightly. She steadied them against the stove rail. Behind her, Silas crossed the kitchen, and she heard him crouch down next to Lucy and put his hand on her back. And she heard him say, low, "Hey, we're okay." And she heard Lucy say, muffled and floorward, I knew." The pot stopped boiling over. Clara held the rail for a moment longer than she needed to. Then she let go and turned around and started making dinner. The letter sat on the kitchen table for the rest of that evening because nobody moved it. It wasn't a conscious decision. Nobody said leave it there. It just kept not getting moved, the way certain objects acquire a kind of gravity after they've delivered important news. Lucy walked around it twice before dinner and touched the corner of it once with one finger, lightly. The way she touched things she was making sure were real. Emma set the plates around it without disturbing it. Silas refilled his coffee and sat and looked at it with the expression of a man who has been bracing for impact for so long that the absence of impact had left him slightly disoriented. Clara put dinner on the table and sat down, and they ate. It was not a celebratory dinner in any theatrical sense. Nobody made a speech. The food was the same soup from the afternoon, with bread and the preserves, and Lucy ate without being reminded, and Emma had 2 bowls, and Silas ate with the slow steadiness of a man who was still processing something, and eating was the thing his body was doing while his mind worked. "What happens now?" Lucy asked, halfway through her bread. "Nothing," Silas said. "That's the point. Nothing happens now." Lucy thought about this. "So it's over?" "The county part is over." "What about the other part?" He looked at her. "What other part?" Lucy looked at Clara, then back at her father. "Mrs. Holt still thinks Clara's a dangerous influence." The table went quiet. Emma pressed her lips together. Silas set his spoon down. Clara said, "Mrs. Holt doesn't have to like me." "But she says things," Lucy said, "to the other kids, and then they say things." Emma put her hand on Lucy's arm, briefly. "It doesn't matter what she says. It matters to me." But Lucy said it simply, without drama. Just a statement of fact. Clara looked at her across the table. "It matters to me, too," she said, "but the county has made its determination. That's the official record. What Mrs. Holt says in the schoolyard, that's a different problem, and it doesn't have the same kind of weight." Lucy appeared to consider this the way she considered most things, fully, without rushing to a conclusion. "Can we make her stop?" "Probably not," Clara said. "But we can outlast it." It was not a satisfying answer for a 5-year-old, and Lucy's expression made that clear. But she finished her bread, and after dinner she helped carry the plates to the basin the way she'd started doing in the past few weeks, and the evening moved forward. After the girls were in bed, Clara washed the dishes and Silas dried them, which had also become a recent habit without discussion. It had just started happening one evening and kept happening. They worked in the kind of quiet that had developed between them over these weeks, the kind that doesn't require filling. Silas picked up the letter from the table without ceremony and folded it and put it in his shirt pocket. "I'm going to frame this," he said. "In the barn." "The barn?" "Where nobody has to look at it but me." Clara handed him a wet bowl. "That's a reasonable place for it." He dried the bowl. "Clara, what Lucy said about things mattering to her, I want you to know they matter to me too. What's been said about you in this town?" He was looking at the bowl rather than at her. "I should have said something publicly. When Fitch ran you out, I was standing 20 feet away and I didn't say a word. You didn't know me. I knew what I was watching." She handed him the soup pot and didn't respond immediately. There was something careful needed here, and she was working out what it was. "You can't undo it," she said finally, "and going back over it doesn't fix anything. What you did was ask me to stay, which was the thing that needed doing." He finished drying the pot and set it on the shelf. "I want to do better than that." "How?" He turned to lean against the counter, facing the room. His expression had the quality of something being decided. "Come to town with me Saturday. Not for supplies, not for work. Just come to town." She looked at him. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means I'd like people to see you as part of this household. Not a temporary arrangement, not something they can wait out." He said it carefully, not grand, just direct. "Fitch ran you out of that town in front of 40 people. I'd like 40 people to see you walk back in with me." Clara turned back to the basin. She finished the last of the dishes and dried her hands on the towel. "You understand that's going to generate its own set of talk." "Yes." "Whitmore's going to interpret it as confirmation of whatever she's been implying." "Probably." "And you're all right with that?" Silas looked at her steadily. "Whitmore's been implying things about my household for 14 months. I'm not managing my life around what she implies." Clara folded the dish towel and hung it on the hook. She looked at the empty table, the clean basin, the lamp turning the kitchen amber. "All right," she said, "Saturday." He nodded once. He took his coffee cup and went out to the porch, the way he did most evenings now. And after a moment, Clara heard the familiar sound of his chair settling under him and the distant horses moving in the dark pasture, and the ordinary quiet of the ranch at night, which she had stopped having to learn and had started simply knowing. Saturday came with a cold, clear sky and the first real smell of coming winter in the air. Not frost yet, but the suggestion of it. The way the light sat differently on the hills, and the grass had gone from green to a dry gold that crackled at the edges. They went to town in the wagon, all four of them, which Clara hadn't anticipated. Silas had simply appeared at the kitchen door after breakfast and said, "You girls coming?" And Emma had looked up from her book and said, "Is there a reason?" And he'd said, "No particular reason." And she'd said, "Then yes," and gotten her coat, and Lucy had appeared at the top of the stairs, already wearing hers. They came over the ridge and down into Harlan's Crossing at 9:30, when the commercial street was busy enough to notice. Clara sat on the wagon bench next to Silas. Emma and Lucy were in the back. She was wearing the better of her two shirts, and she'd done her hair with some attention, not because she was dressing for performance, but because she'd decided, getting ready that morning, that she wasn't going to walk into that town looking like she was braced for a fight. She was going to walk in looking like a person who lived here, which was what she was. The first person to notice them was Doherty, who was sweeping his front step as the wagon went past. He raised a hand. Silas raised his back. Clara caught Doherty's eye, and he gave her a nod that was, she thought, as close to a public endorsement as a feed store owner was going to offer on a Saturday morning. Fitch's Dry Goods was on their left as they came down Decker Street. Fitch himself was in the window. Clara saw him see them, the recognition moving across his face. He looked at her, then at Silas, then away. Silas pulled the wagon up in front of Garrett's Hardware and got down and helped Lucy down from the back, which he did without thinking, just automatic, the easy physicality of a father with his child. Emma jumped down herself and came around to stand beside Clara as Clara stepped off the wagon. They were on Decker Street, the same street. Clara looked at it, at the spot 30 yards back where she'd stood with her bag, and heard Fitch's voice carrying over the heads of 40 people. And then she looked at the street as it was now, with the wagon behind her and Emma beside her, and Lucy already pulling Silas toward the window of the general store to look at something in the display. "You okay?" Emma said quietly, not quite looking at her. "Yes," Clara said, which was true. She had a particular feeling in her chest that wasn't quite anything she had a clean name for. Not triumph, not relief, something simpler and more durable than either of those. "People are looking," Emma said. "Let them look." Emma's mouth curved slightly. Not quite a smile, but working in that direction. "Okay," she said, and they walked down the sidewalk together, unhurried. They were at the general store, Lucy examining a display of glass buttons, while Silas talked with the owner about an order of wire, when Temperance Whitmore came in. She was not alone. She had Nora Aldridge with her, which probably meant she hadn't expected to encounter the Hale wagon on Decker Street and had collected Nora for moral support in the 30 seconds between seeing it and entering the store. Claire was standing near the back examining a shelf of goods when she heard the bell over the door and turned, and there they were. The moment went still the way moments do when a room adjusts to a change in it. Whitmore's eyes went from Silas to Emma to Lucy to Clara, in that order, and landed on Clara with an expression that managed to be composed and pointed at the same time. Clara held her gaze. "Mr. Hale," Whitmore said. Her tone was that of a woman who has decided to be civil as a form of strategy. "I heard about the county's determination." "Good news travels," Silas said. He said it pleasantly, which was more pointed than anger would have been. "I hope the girls are well." She looked at Emma and Lucy, who were standing together near the button display, Emma with her hand on Lucy's shoulder. "Emma, Lucy, you look well." "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore," Emma said. She said it with the politeness of someone who has been raised to be polite to people they have complicated feelings about. Whitmore turned back to Silas. "The inspection concluded satisfactorily, then. The county closed the case," he said. "The household is considered stable and suitable." "I'm glad to hear it." A pause. I hope you understand that my concern was always for the girl's well-being. I know what your concern was, Temperance. He said it quietly, no heat in it. I'd like to think we can put this behind us. She absorbed this. Nora Aldridge was looking at a shelf of thread with intense and unconvincing focus. Whitmore's gaze moved to Clara again. That same composed, measuring look, but there was something different in it this time. Something that might have been the adjustment a person makes when they've been wrong about something and are still working out whether to admit it. Miss Bennet, she said. Mrs. Whitmore, Clara said. A pause. The store was very quiet. The owner behind the counter had found something to look at on the floor. The house was in good order, Whitmore said, when Mercer came. I understand that. It was not an apology. Clara didn't expect one and wouldn't have trusted one if it arrived too easily. Thank you, she said. Another pause. Whitmore nodded, a small, deliberate thing, and then she turned and went to the counter to make her purchase, and the room started breathing again. Emma appeared at Clara's elbow. Did that just happen? She murmured. Something like it. Was that an apology? It was as close to one as we're likely to get. Emma was quiet for a moment. Is that enough? Clara looked at Whitmore's back at the counter. The rigid posture, the careful movements of a woman who has always believed that how you hold yourself matters. For now, she said. It's a start. They had lunch at the small restaurant on the end of the block. Not a fancy place, just 4 tables and a counter, and a woman named Pearl who ran it alone and cooked everything in a kitchen the size of a closet. Silas ordered for the girls, and Clara ordered for herself, and they sat at the table by the window and ate. And the only unusual thing about it was that it felt to Clara almost entirely normal. People glanced. A few people nodded to Silas. One woman Clara didn't know smiled at Lucy and said she looked like her mother, which made Silas's face do something complicated for a moment before he said, She does. She really does. After lunch, walking back to the wagon, Lucy put her hand in Clara's without preamble or explanation. The way small children do when holding someone's hand is simply what they want to do. Clara looked down. Lucy was looking at the street ahead of them, perfectly content. Clara held her hand and kept walking. It was the kind of thing that was too small to be called a moment and too large to be called nothing. Vorsicht. The weeks that followed had a different quality than what had come before. The urgency was gone. The particular driving tension of the inspection period, the countdown quality to every day. In its place was something that asked more of Clara in some ways, because it required her to stop organizing her life around the thing she was working toward and simply live inside the thing that was already here. She was not good at this initially. She caught herself, in the first week after the letter, inventorying the house for what needed doing next with the same focused intentionality she'd had in the run-up to the inspection. And one morning, Silas came into the kitchen and found her with a list of winter readiness tasks spread on the table and looked at it and then looked at her. Are you all right? He said. There's still a lot to do before winter, she said. The east wall of the barn roof is patched, but it needs proper shingling. The root cellar inventory is Clara. She stopped. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He had coffee in his hand and he set it on the table and looked at her with those gray eyes that she had learned to read better than she'd intended to. The inspection is done, he said. You can slow down. Slowing down isn't how I'm built. I know, but there's working because something needs doing. And there's working because you're afraid of what you'll feel if you stop. He said it without judgment, which made it harder to deflect. I know the difference. I spent 14 months doing the second one and calling it the first. She looked at the list, at the careful handwriting, the itemized columns. The roof does need shingling, she said. Yes, and we'll do it. Together, next week, when the weather holds. He picked up his coffee. Today is Saturday. Emma's home. Lucy wants to show you something she made in school. She's been carrying it in her bag for 2 days, waiting for the right moment. If you sit at that table with a list all morning, the right moment is going to pass. Clara folded the list. She put it in her pocket. What did she make? I don't know. She won't show anyone but you. She stood up. She went to find Lucy, who was in the parlor with her school bag and a carefully guarded expression that broke open into pleasure the moment Clara appeared in the doorway. I made a picture, Lucy announced, for you, but I wanted to wait until a good time. Now's a good time, Clara said, and sat down on the parlor floor, which was the level that Lucy operated on best. Lucy produced from her bag a piece of paper that had been folded and unfolded several times and was slightly the worse for it. She smoothed it on her knee and handed it over. It was a drawing in pencil and what appeared to be a smear of red crayon, depicting, from what Clara could gather, 4 people in front of a house. The house had a porch. The figures were unequal in height, too tall and too short, and they were standing close together in the way that indicated Lucy had drawn them as a group rather than as separate individuals. One of the tall figures had long hair, which Clara gathered was meant to be her. "Is this us?" Clara asked. "Yes." Lucy pointed at each figure in turn. "That's Pa. That's you. That's Emma. That's me. And that's the house." "I can see the porch," Clara said. "I drew the porch because you fixed it," Lucy said, as though this were an obvious reason to include it. Clara looked at the drawing for a moment. 4 people in a house with a porch, on a slightly crumpled piece of school paper, and all of them standing close enough to be clearly together. She had a dangerous feeling behind her eyes and managed it. "Can I keep this?" she asked. "I made it for you," Lucy said, with the slight impatience of someone who has already explained this. Clara folded it, carefully, along the existing lines, and put it in her shirt pocket. October arrived and the temperature started meaning business. They shingled the east side of the barn roof over 3 days, Clara and Silas working from opposite ends of the ridge, and it was uncomfortable work. Cold fingers, steep pitch, shingles that needed to be split before they could be nailed. And at one point, Silas miscounted his overlap and had to pull up half a row and start it over, which made him say a word under his breath that Emma, passing below on her way to the chicken coop, pretended not to hear. Clara pretended not to hear it too, but something in how she kept her face straight apparently conveyed the opposite, because he looked at her and said, "Don't." "I didn't say anything." "You were about to." "I was about to hand you the next shingle," she said. "Right," he said, and took the shingle, and the corner of his mouth was doing something. They worked well together physically, which she hadn't fully expected. Silas was methodical, and she was faster, and they'd worked out without discussion a rhythm where she set the pace and he steadied the work. And the roof that resulted was not beautiful, but it was sound, which was what it needed to be. On the last day of the roof work, coming down from the barn in the late afternoon with sawdust and shingle grit in her hair, Clara passed the mirror in the hallway, the one she generally moved through quickly, a leftover habit from years of not wanting to look too long. And she stopped. She didn't recognize herself immediately, which happens sometimes after a long stretch of physical work, when your face has changed slightly from weather and effort. She looked older than the woman who had walked into Harlan's Crossing 7 weeks ago, or maybe just more settled. Something in the eyes, a quality of being in a specific place rather than moving through it. She looked at herself for a moment, and then she went and washed her hands for dinner. It was Emma who changed things, in the end, or started the changing of them. She did it on a Thursday evening in the 3rd week of October, at the kitchen table, during the after-dinner hour when Lucy was already in bed and Silas was on the porch, and Clara was mending a tear in the knee of Lucy's school trousers. Emma came and sat across from her and opened her arithmetic book and did 3 problems, and then put her pencil down and said, without looking up from the page, "Do you want to stay?" Clara's hands kept moving on the mending. "I'm staying. I mean, permanently. Or as close to it as anything is." The needle went through the fabric. Clara pulled the thread through. "Why are you asking?" "Because I want to know." Emma looked up. She had, in the past weeks, lost some of the particular wariness she'd come in with. Not all of it. Emma was not a girl who was going to lose her wariness entirely. It was built into her architecture. But some of it. Enough that what was underneath was more visible. A person who was deeply intelligent and occasionally afraid of how much she wanted things. "You came here with 1 bag. You've been here 2 months. Your bag's still in your room and you haven't added much to it. But you also haven't talked about leaving." "I haven't talked about leaving because I haven't been planning to leave." "But you haven't talked about staying either." Clara set the mending in her lap. This was a version of the conversation she'd been having with herself, alone, on the porch at night, and she hadn't expected it to arrive from Emma's direction first. "I'm not sure what staying looks like," she said honestly. "I don't have a clear picture of it." Emma nodded slowly. "Pa does, I think. He's just—" She seemed to choose words. He's slow. He doesn't want to push anything because he's worried about getting it wrong again. Getting what wrong? Emma gave her a look that was patient and slightly disbelieving, the look of a 14-year-old who cannot understand why the adults around her are being deliberately dim. Emma, Clara said. I'm just saying what I see, Emma said. I'm not going to tell him what to do. Or you. I just wanted you to know that whatever you decide, me and Lucy aren't going anywhere. And She picked her pencil back up. We'd be glad if you didn't go anywhere either. She went back to her arithmetic. Clara went back to the mending. The lamp burned between them. Outside, the porch boards gave the slight creak that meant Silas had shifted in his chair, the particular creak of the board third from the door, which Clara could now distinguish from all the other sounds the house made. She'd learned this house the way she'd never let herself learn another place. The creaks and drafts and particular qualities of each room at different hours. The sounds of the people in it. She pushed the needle through the fabric and pulled it back and did the next stitch. Jeez. The conversation with Silas happened on a Sunday. Not by design, or if it was by design, it was his design, and she hadn't been told. The girls had gone to spend the afternoon with a neighbor family 2 miles down the road whose daughter was Lucy's age and whose older son Emma tolerated with an air of studious disinterest that Clara suspected concealed something else. Silas had driven them and come back alone, and when Clara heard the wagon return, she was in the barn checking on the horses. He came into the barn and stood in the aisle, and she knew from how he'd walked in. Not the purposeful stride of someone coming to do something, but the careful quiet of someone who has decided to say a thing and is still finding the approach. That this was a different kind of visit. She kept her hands on the horse's neck and waited. I've been trying to figure out how to say this for a few weeks, he said. All right. I keep getting it wrong in my head, and I figure I'm just going to get it wrong out loud too, so I might as well get it over with. That's a reasonable approach, she said. She turned to face him. He looked like a man who was genuinely bracing himself, which she found more endearing than she had language for. I don't want you to stay because of the girls, he said, or because of the work, or because you feel some obligation, because I gave you a roof when you needed one. I want you to be clear that I know none of those are reasons. Silas, I'm getting there. She waited. I want you to stay because He stopped. He looked at the barn floor for a moment, then back at her. Because things are better when you're here. Not the house, though it is, and not the girls, though they are. I mean, he made a gesture that was slightly helpless, which she'd never seen him do before. I'm better. I didn't know how far I'd gone from myself until you started pulling me back without even trying to. And now I can see the distance I'd traveled, and I don't want to go back to it. Clara looked at him. He looked back. He had the expression of someone who has said the true thing and is now waiting to find out what it costs. That's not very far from what I'd say, she said quietly. Something shifted in his face. Yeah? I've been trying not to want it too much. I have some experience with wanting to stay somewhere and not being able to. She looked at the horse under her hand, then back at him. This is different. I know it's different. You're allowed to want it, he said. You're allowed to want the same things other people want. She looked at him for a long moment. The barn was quiet around them. The horses shifting and breathing and the cold October light coming through the high window in a long slant. I know, she said finally. I'm still getting used to that. He crossed the barn aisle and stood in front of her, and the particular quality of the distance between them changed. I'd like to ask you properly, he said, when I've got the words right, but I wanted you to know where I was heading. I appreciate the advance notice, she said. There was something happening behind her own ribs that she wasn't going to name yet, but that had been building for weeks and was now making itself impossible to ignore. He smiled, actually smiled, full and unguarded, which she realized she'd been waiting to see since the first day. It changed his face considerably. I'll work on the words, he said. Take your time, she said. I'll be here. He nodded. That one deliberate nod she'd learned meant he was taking something in and holding it. Then he went back to the house, and Clara turned back to the horse, and the barn settled around her with its particular smells of hay and cold air and the warmth of animals, and she stood there for a long moment in the quiet, her hand on the horse's neck, letting herself feel the full weight of it. The full, ordinary, difficult, specific weight of being somewhere that she meant to stay. He took 3 weeks to find the words. Clara didn't count the days exactly, but she was aware of them passing, the way you're aware of weather, not tracking it consciously, just knowing the conditions. November had come in cold and deliberate, laying frost on the grass each morning that didn't lift until nearly 10. The root cellar was full. The wood was stacked higher than it had been, probably, since Ellen was alive to insist on it. The barn roof held through the first hard rain without a single drip, which Silas noted with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had spent 3 cold days on that roof and felt the result was owed to him. Life had taken on a shape that Clara recognized as domestic, in the truest sense of the word, not tidy or frictionless, but inhabited. There were mornings when the stove wouldn't draw and the kitchen filled with smoke and everyone's eyes watered while Clara sorted it out with a piece of tin and some profanity she kept low enough that Lucy wouldn't catch the specific words. There were evenings when Silas came in from the pasture, tired past speaking, and ate in silence that nobody took personally. There were afternoons when Lucy had a crying episode about nothing identifiable. The particular emotional weather of a 5-year-old that moved through like a fast storm and was over before anyone fully understood it. And Clara would sit with her on the kitchen floor until it passed, not trying to explain or fix it, just present. Emma turned 15 in the second week of November. They made a cake, which Clara and Lucy produced together with some difficulty. The layers came out uneven, and the icing went on lumpy because the cake wasn't quite cool enough when they started. And it was not a beautiful cake by any objective standard, and Emma looked at it and said, "It's crooked." And Lucy said, "We made it ourselves," with such dignity that Emma laughed, which was the best possible outcome. Silas gave Emma a book he'd ordered from the catalog 3 weeks earlier and had been hiding in the barn. It was a surveying manual. Emma had mentioned once, in passing, that she thought she might want to learn surveying because women in this county didn't do it, and she found that a reasonable argument for doing it. And when she unwrapped it, she held it in both hands and looked at her father with an expression that Clara had never seen on her face before, something open and young and briefly unguarded. "How did you know?" Emma said. "You mentioned it," Silas said. "In August. I was listening." Emma looked back at the book. She nodded once, with the composure she always recovered quickly, but her hands held the book the way hands hold things they intend to keep. Clara watched this from across the table and felt the thing she'd been feeling for weeks, the accumulation of small moments that individually meant nothing and collectively meant everything. She thought about what she'd said to Mercer in the parlor, about the difference between a house that was failing and a house that was in repair. She hadn't been able to see the full picture then. She'd only been describing what she hoped was true. Sitting at a table with a crooked cake and a surveying manual and these 3 people, she could see it clearly. The repair was real. It had happened incrementally, imperfectly, without fanfare, and it was real. He asked her on a Tuesday evening, which was not a special day, and had nothing particular about it to recommend it as the occasion for the thing that happened. Clara was on the porch in the cold, which had become her thinking place the way certain spots become yours without planning. The temperature had dropped after dinner, and she'd taken her coat and her cup of coffee and gone out anyway, because the cold was clean and the stars were doing their work overhead, and she needed 10 minutes of quiet after a loud day. She heard the door, and then Silas was beside her, leaning on the porch rail the way he did, looking out at the dark pasture. "It's cold," he said. "It is," she agreed. He was quiet for a moment. She could see his breath. The horses were moving somewhere in the dark, the sound of them a low, steady presence. "I told you I'd work on the words," he said. Her hands tightened slightly around her cup. "You did." "I've been working on them." He turned to face her, his back to the rail. In the low light from the window, his face was serious in a way that wasn't heavy. Serious the way a person is when they're saying something true, and they know it. "I don't have a speech. I tried to write one, actually. Emma found the paper in the barn and brought it to me at dinner without comment, which was the most Emma thing that's ever happened." Clara felt the laugh before it arrived and let it come. "What did the speech say?" "Things that sounded better in my head." He shifted his weight. "What I actually want to say is simpler. I want to marry you. Not because the house needs running, or the girls need a mother, or I need help with the ranch, though all of those things are true, and I'm not going to pretend they're not. He paused. I want to marry you because you're the person I want to talk to at the end of the day. And because you told me I was allowed to want that, once, and I've been thinking about it ever since. Clara looked at him for a long moment. The cold had put color in his face, and he was looking back at her with that expression she'd learned, the one that didn't lie, the one where you could see the effort when he tried to hide something. I told you that about yourself, she said, that you were allowed to want things. I know. I'm using it back at you. She looked out at the pasture, at the dark hills and the cold sky and the lit window of the house behind them, where, if she listened, she could hear Emma and Lucy having some kind of disagreement about something in the kitchen, the ordinary friction of sisters. She thought about the woman who had stood in this same county 6 months ago with a bag that weighed nothing and nowhere to go. She thought about the road out of Harlan's Crossing and the sound of a child screaming and the decision her legs made before her mind caught up. She thought about what it had cost her to stay in one place long enough to want to stay. The particular vulnerability of that, the way it opened something in you that being in motion kept safely closed. She thought about what she knew, from the inside, about what it meant to grow up without a place that was yours. She thought about Emma and Lucy and what she could give them. Not perfection, not the mother they'd lost, not a replacement for the life that had broken open 14 months ago, but a presence. Consistent and daily and honest. The thing she'd never had herself, offered now to 2 girls who deserved it, and a man who was looking at her with his whole honest face and waiting. You know I don't come with anything, she said. No family, no money, no history that makes it simple. I know that. I'm going to keep being the way I am. I'm not going to get easier. Clara, the corner of his mouth shifted. I fixed a roof with you. I know how you are. She looked at him. Yes, she said. He blinked. Yes, you know how you are. Or, yes, she said again, clearly. The exhale he let out was almost involuntary, the breath of someone who has been holding something for a long time. He reached out and she took his hand, and they stood like that on the cold porch with the dark pasture ahead of them and the lit window behind. And it was not a dramatic moment in the way stories sometimes make these moments. There was no music, no particular quality of light. It was just cold and real, and his hand was rough from work, and hers was too, and that seemed to Clara exactly right. Inside, the disagreement between Emma and Lucy resolved itself with a bang that was probably a cabinet door and then went quiet. We should go in, Clara said. Probably, he said, and didn't move for another moment. She told Emma the next morning. Not because it was an obligation, but because Emma had earned the information directly. She found her at the kitchen table before breakfast, already dressed for school, working on something in her notebook. Clara sat down across from her, and Emma looked up and seemed to read something in her face immediately, because she set down her pencil and waited. Your father asked me something last night, Clara said. Emma nodded slowly. I said yes. Emma looked at the table. She was quiet for long enough that Clara felt the first edge of uncertainty. Had she misjudged? Had Emma's encouragement been about something less permanent than this? And then Emma looked up, and her eyes were bright in a way that she was working to control. Okay, she said. Her voice was level. Okay. Good. You're allowed to have feelings about it, Clara said. It's a big change. It's not a change, Emma said. You've been here. You're already... It's not a change. She picked her pencil up, put it down. She would have liked you. I said that already, I know. But I mean it more now. Clara held the shape of that. She would have liked you. And let it mean what Emma meant it to mean. Not a replacement, an addition, the family expanding rather than substituting one thing for another. I'm not trying to be your mother, Clara said. I want to be honest about that. I know, Emma said. I'm 15. I don't need a mother in the way Lucy does. A pause. But I don't not need one either. She said it carefully, like something she'd been working out the phrasing of for a while. And you've been doing it without the title anyway, so? Clara looked at her. Emma picked up her pencil again and looked at her notebook. You should tell Lucy yourself, Emma said. She's going to lose her mind. Clara stood. What kind of losing her mind? The good kind. Emma was already writing. She's going to want to know if she can be in the wedding. There isn't going to be much of a... She's going to want to be in it regardless of how much of it there is. Emma glanced up briefly. Letter, She's been carrying Lucy's wooden horse around in her apron pocket for 2 weeks because she said she was keeping it company. She needs something to do with all of that. Clara went to find Lucy. Lucy was in the yard feeding the chickens, which was her current assigned task and one she performed with enormous seriousness, narrating to each bird individually as she scattered grain. She looked up when Clara came out. "I need to tell you something," Clara said. Lucy handed a handful of grain to the nearest hen and turned her full attention to Clara in the way she had, completely, all at once. "What?" "Your father asked me to marry him last night. I said yes." Lucy stared at her. Several seconds passed. The hen continued eating, indifferent. "So you're staying," Lucy said. "Forever staying." "That's the plan." Lucy looked at the chickens for a moment, then back at Clara, and then she crossed the yard and put both arms around Clara's waist and held on with the uncalculated grip of a child who has decided something and acted on it without deliberation. Clara put her hand on the back of her head. "Emma said I could be in the wedding," Lucy said into her coat. "Emma doesn't know that for certain." Lucy leaned back and looked up at her. "Can I?" "Yes," Clara said. Lucy returned to the chickens, satisfied. Ichi. They were married at the end of November, on a Saturday, in a ceremony that was small enough to be honest about what it was. Not a performance for the town's benefit, but a real thing between real people, witnessed by the people who had a right to witness it. Judge Harold Prentice, who rode circuit through the county and had known Silas for years, performed the ceremony in the Hale Ranch parlor. Emma stood beside Clara. Lucy stood beside Emma in a dress she had insisted on wearing despite the cold and the fact that it was the dress she wore to birthday parties and was not strictly appropriate, but nobody made an issue of it because the expression on her face was the kind that you don't put obstacles in front of. Dougherty came. He sat in the chair by the window and held his hat in his hands and looked at the floor throughout with the expression of a man who is moved by something and would prefer not to be caught at it. Pearl from the restaurant came, which Clara hadn't expected, and brought 2 pies, which she hadn't expected either. Cass Dougherty's wife brought their son, who sat next to Lucy and told her in a whisper that her dress was nice, which Lucy received with the gravity due a significant compliment. The room was warm. The judge read what needed to be read. Silas held Clara's hand and looked at her with those gray eyes and said what he was asked to say in a voice that was steady but not easy, which was the most honest version of it. Clara said what she was asked to say. Her voice was steady, too. She had not cried. She had made a specific arrangement with herself about this the night before, and she held to it, though the arrangement required some effort at the moment when Emma, standing beside her, reached over without looking and briefly put her hand over Clara's, and then took it away. Judge Prentice said the concluding words and Silas kissed her, briefly and without performance, and Lucy said audibly, "Is that it?" And Emma said, "Yes, that's it." And Dougherty laughed from his chair by the window, and that was how it ended and began. The town found out in the way small towns find things out, through the mechanism of everyone already suspecting and then someone confirming. By the following week, it was general knowledge, and the reaction was, like most things in Harlan's Crossing, divided. Fitch made no comment that reached Clara's ears, which she considered neither an endorsement nor an objection, simply the silence of a man waiting to see which way things settled before committing. Some people offered congratulations to Silas that were warm, and some that were polite, and some that included in their phrasing a note of surprise they hadn't quite smoothed over. Clara received the congratulations of the women she actually knew, Pearl and Mrs. Dougherty, and a woman named Agnes Pryor, who ran the school lending library and had been quietly lending Emma books above her grade level for 2 years, and found them sufficient. Nora Aldridge stopped her on Decker Street in the second week of December. Clara saw her coming and kept walking at the same pace, prepared to offer a nod and continue. But Nora stopped directly in front of her and said, "I want to apologize." Clara stopped. Nora was looking at a point near Clara's shoulder rather than directly at her, which was uncomfortable to watch, but also, Clara understood, the best she could do. When he said what he said, in the street, I should have spoken up. I should have said something. I'd been the one letting you board for 3 weeks, and I knew what kind of person you were, and I didn't say a word. Clara looked at her. Why not? Because I was worried about what Fitch would say about me if I did. She said it with the bluntness of someone who has rehearsed the honest version and decided to say it before she lost the nerve. That's the truth. It wasn't anything about you. It was about me. Clara was quiet for a moment. She thought about the woman who had picked up her bag from Decker Street 6 months ago, and about what it would have meant then to hear a different version of this story. She thought about whether the apology was enough, and whether enough was the right standard to apply to it. I appreciate you saying so, Clara said. That took something. Nora nodded, still not quite meeting her eyes. I heard you're at the Hale Ranch, married. Yes, that's good, Nora said. I'm glad. She said it with a sincerity that was slightly awkward, the sincerity of someone who genuinely means a thing and isn't practiced at expressing it, which Clara found more convincing than a smoother version would have been. Thank you, Nora, she said, and let her go. She stood on Decker Street for a moment after Nora walked away. The same street, the same November sky, or near enough. She looked at the spot where Fitch had stood in front of her, and she had picked up her bag and started walking toward the edge of town. What would have happened if she had kept walking? If she hadn't heard the scream, or had heard it and kept going because getting out was the priority and other people's emergencies had never been hers to handle? She would be somewhere else by now. Another town, another temporary room, another set of people who were glad enough when she arrived and indifferent when she left. She knew what that felt like. She knew it so well she'd stopped noticing how much it weighed. She was standing on the street where they'd tried to push her out, and she was going home. The distinction between those two facts was not lost on her. She went to Pearl's for the order she'd come into town to collect, and she went home. Winter arrived properly in December, the kind that settled in and meant to stay. The valley around the Hale Ranch filled with snow in the second week, and the work of the ranch contracted to the indoor and the immediate, the livestock, the wood, the meals, the lamp-lit evenings. Clara had always hated winter in transient places, the cold intensifying every quality of temporariness. In a room that isn't yours, winter is an endurance. In a house that is, it's something else. She came to understand the difference that year. She came to understand it in the particular sound of Lucy reading aloud from her school primer at the kitchen table while dinner cooked on the stove. In the sight of Emma's surveying manual propped open on the parlor chair, covered in pencil annotations. In Silas coming in from the barn on the coldest evenings with ice in his beard, and the immediate automatic way he reached for the coffee she'd started leaving hot on the back of the stove, because he came in at roughly the same time each evening and was always cold. She came to understand it in the small and unremarkable accumulation of daily things. The crack in the upstairs hall that settled at a particular temperature and made a sound she now knew meant the cold had gone below 20. The way Lucy's hair needed to be done differently in winter because the dry air made it static and fine. The particular brand of quiet that fell over the house after both girls were in bed, and she and Silas sat in the kitchen with the lamp between them, sometimes talking and sometimes not. The silence the same quality either way. She came to understand it in her own body, in the way she stopped at some point in December, doing the unconscious inventory she'd done in every previous place, the ongoing low-level assessment of exits and durations. The internal question she'd been asking herself for 20 years, how long will this last, and what comes after, went quiet. Not answered, just quiet, like something that had been running in the background for so long you forgot it was there, and then one day it stopped, and the silence where it had been was enormous and ordinary at the same time. Christmas was the first one in the Hale house that hadn't been shadowed. Clara knew this without being told. She could feel it in how the others moved through the preparations, the absence of the particular bracing quality that holidays carry when someone is missing. Ellen Hale was not forgotten. She was present in the preserved fruit in the cellar she'd put up the last summer she was alive, in the ornaments that Emma unwrapped from tissue paper with careful hands, in Lucy saying on Christmas morning, "Mama always made the hot cocoa with 2 spoonfuls, not 1. And Silas saying, "I know, we'll do 2, and doing it. Clara made space for this. She understood, without needing it explained, that her presence didn't require Ellen's absence from the room. A family's history doesn't get replaced by new chapters. It carries forward, accumulates, becomes the context for what comes next. She had no history of Christmases to bring. She brought herself, which was the only thing she'd ever had to offer, and had spent a long time believing wasn't enough. She watched Silas and his daughters around the table Christmas morning and felt the particular quality of watching something that you're also part of. Not from outside a window, but from inside the room, at the table, with a cup in your hand and your name in the conversation and somewhere to put your coat. Lucy gave her a present she'd made at school, a small woven thing from wool scraps, indeterminate in shape, but given with enormous ceremony. Clara put it on the windowsill of the bedroom where she'd put the drawing, the slightly crumpled one of 4 figures in front of a house with a porch. Emma gave her the arithmetic notebook from her school year, not the current one, the one from before. "I don't need it anymore," she said when Clara looked at her. "But you said once that you never had books growing up, so?" She shrugged in the way she shrugged things off when she was hoping they mattered. "It's something." Silas gave her a pair of good leather work gloves, which were exactly what she needed and which he'd clearly selected with attention because they were the right size, not the average guess. She put them on at the table and they fit, and she kept them on for the rest of the morning because the kitchen was cold and also because she wanted to. "Merry Christmas," Silas said. "Merry Christmas," she said back. Lucy tried to eat the entire jar of the preserved fruit at once and was redirected. Emma read 3 chapters of the surveying manual before noon and didn't apologize for it. Silas burned the first batch of the special breakfast he'd decided to make himself. He was not a natural cook, and this had not changed. And Clara fixed it without commentary, and it was edible mostly. It was not a perfect Christmas. It was a real one, which is the better thing to be. Dick. January was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after everything has been resolved and the world has moved on to other concerns, and the life you've built is just your life now, without the urgency that shaped it. Clara had never lived through that kind of quiet before. She'd always been in the urgency or between urgencies, either working towards something or moving away from something or waiting to find out which one was coming next. She didn't know what to do with stillness for a little while. She filled it, initially, the way she filled everything, with work. But Silas caught her one January morning tearing apart a section of kitchen cabinet that genuinely did not need tearing apart and looked at her with the patient expression of a man who has been paying attention. "What's the problem with the cabinet?" he said. "The hinge alignment is off." "By how much?" "A little." "Clara." She stopped pulling at the hinge. "I don't know what to do when there's nothing that needs fixing," she said. It came out more honest than she'd intended. He was quiet for a moment. "You could just be here." "I don't know what that looks like." He thought about it. "It looks like this morning. You were at the table with Lucy while she practiced her letters. You weren't fixing anything. You were just there." She remembered that. Lucy had been forming the letter A with her tongue between her teeth and the concentration of someone diffusing something dangerous, and Clara had been watching her and drinking her coffee, and it had been nothing. Just a morning. "That counts?" she said. "That counts," he said. "That's most of what any of this is." She looked at the cabinet hinge, then she looked at him. Then she closed the cabinet door. The hinge was slightly off, but the cabinet functioned, and functioning was what mattered. "All right," she said. She went and sat at the table and had a second cup of coffee and didn't fix anything, and it was difficult for about 10 minutes, and then it wasn't. Spring came back the way it always did. Not all at once, but in pieces, the cold loosening its grip 1 degree at a time. The frost stopped staying on the grass past 10. The creek came up with snowmelt and made itself known at night, a sound that had been absent all winter and came back like something remembered. Clara turned the garden in the first week that the ground would allow it. Lucy helped, or provided the intention of helping, which manifested as following Clara down the rows and asking questions about which seeds did what, and why the worms were good and not bad, and whether the garden had missed them over winter. Clara answered each question with the seriousness it was offered, because Lucy's questions deserved that. "Did you have a garden when you were little?" Lucy asked, on the 3rd row. "No," Clara said. "Did you want one?" Clara thought about this honestly. Had she wanted a garden at 5, at 7, at 10? She tried to locate it. "I think I wanted a place to put things," she said. Finally. "That would still be there later. A garden is like that." Lucy appeared to consider this. "That makes sense," she said, and moved on to the next question. Emma came out after school and walked the perimeter of the garden with her arms crossed, looking at it with the evaluating eyes she'd apparently been developing since birth. "You moved the squash section," she said. "Better sun on the east side in the late afternoon." Emma nodded slowly. "Mom always put it on the west." "Do you want it on the west?" Emma considered. "No, you're probably right about the sun." She looked at the rose. "It looks good. It'll look better in 6 weeks." "Everything does," Emma said, with the particular brand of 15-year-old philosophy that arrived in her speech sometimes without warning, and she went back inside to do her homework. Clara stood in the garden in the early spring light, smelling the turned earth and the cold creek water on the air, looking at the house. The house with its solid porch post and its shingled roof and its lit window, and inside it the sound of Emma at the table and Lucy asking Silas something about worms, and his voice answering her. She had a clear thought, standing there, that she recognized as something she needed to hold on to. Not a lesson exactly, more an observation about how things actually work, which is different from how we imagine they will. She'd spent most of her life believing that belonging was something that happened to you, that you either fit somewhere or you didn't, and the fitting was determined by forces outside you, by who wanted you there, by whether you had the right history, the right family, the right kind of past that made you legible to the people already in place. She'd been moved from house to house as a child believing this. She'd moved herself from town to town as an adult believing it. She'd stood on Decker Street with her bag at her feet believing it, waiting to find out if she fit or if she didn't. What she understood now, standing in the garden in the first real light of April, was that belonging wasn't something that happened to you. It was something you built. With your hands, in the actual hours of actual days, through the accumulation of ordinary things done consistently. It was a porch post and a bread starter and a horse that no one else would handle and a child spelling homework and a roof that didn't leak. It was being present when present was what was needed and honest when honest was what was needed, and still there the next morning and the morning after. You didn't fit into a place like a key into a lock. You made yourself part of it through the daily work of making yourself part of it. And the making was never finished. It was ongoing, the way a garden was ongoing, requiring the next season's attention and the one after that. She had not built a perfect life. She had built a real one, which was harder and also better, and she was going to keep building it. The creek ran cold and loud down in the draw. The first bird of spring she'd heard all week, some early arrival, impatient and certain, was calling from the cottonwoods in a voice that carried across the whole valley. Clara picked up her spade and went back to the garden. She had seeds to get in before the light went,